Please be seated. Cross-culture shock. I remember where I was when I was first introduced to this phrase. It was early December in 2001, 20 years ago. I was sitting in the meeting room of my dorm in Harbin, China. With me were 20 or so other American students who had been there to study the language. In about 2 weeks, we were going to go home and on our separate ways. Now, I knew about culture shock. My college had required rigorous language requirements and cultural training so that we would do well when we were in this program. Ken, our program's director, however, was talking about cross-culture shock, an idea that was new to me. He said when you move to a new to you country or culture, you often expect things to be different than you're used to. However, if you return home after being there for a while, many people expect things to go back to the way they were. He told us we have been changed and we have been shaped by living in a new culture for 4 months. And there's a chance that returning home will feel a little upside down. One of the images often used to talk about culture is an iceberg. We can see a lot of the aspects on top, like art, architecture, clothing, what we eat. We can hear the languages and accents. Below the water, though, exists a lot more. There's ways of being, taboos, how you should and shouldn't act in every situation, people's ideas, philosophies, how you build trust. At that point, we knew what part of culture had changed for us above the iceberg. We lived in our second language for a while. My roommate confirmed that I now spoke in my sleep in Chinese. We learned to cook and eat foods that were new to us. We could cross traffic lane by lane in a huge metropolitan area and not get hit. But below the iceberg was trickier. For example, we lived through 9/11 as foreigners. All of the news we heard about it was in our second language and was Chinese language programs. We were physically separated from our loved ones and people. And our memories and experiences of that tragedy will always be different. Not better, not worse, different. And Ken said there were other ways we changed that we may not notice until we bumped up against something that felt strange. Ken said that some people hold on so tightly to the idea of returning to normal, not noticing how they've changed, that it can be a shock when you get back home and your expectations are different than your reality. Normal is undefinable, and if unexamined, can be a harmful concept. And so we were encouraged to let go of that idea of normal and acknowledge that we've changed and move forward. Since that conversation, I have moved twice again internationally and back to Minnesota. Each time I've been grateful for what Ken taught and have figured out how I best adapt. Be gentle and firm with myself, especially in giving up the idea of normal and a universal normal. Be curious, not judgmental, on the ways I've changed and the ways others have changed. Find and embrace something which brings me comfort in the change. It can be small. Each time I moved home, I bought a Dairy Queen ice cream cake and ate a slice of it for breakfast until it was gone. And wonder. Wonder about what am I being called to give up and what am I being called to embrace. For these last 20 months, I have never been so close to home for such a long time. And I have never felt like I needed this cross-cultural shock training in the ways I have before. We skipped a part of the gospel between last week and this week. We skipped Jesus telling his disciples for the third time that he will be crucified and he will rise again. It's now only a week or so away in Jesus' life. And this time, Jesus was his most graphic and detailed about what is going to happen. James and John respond to this third announcement with what we just heard. It's so easy to be angry with them, like Jesus' other 10 disciples, or to hold them up as examples of what not to do. They're way off base. We don't want to live into their example. Here's the thing. For all of their mistakes and misguided ideas, they've given up what they knew of their life to walk with Jesus. It hasn't been an easy road. It's meant leaving their idea of home, and they only have what they take with them. They've seen Jesus' miracles. They've heard Jesus' stories. They have fed the crowds. They have been in the storm and seen him calm it. They're still at Jesus' side. They've now been fully immersed in a new way of being with Jesus for an extended period of time. Jesus has been teaching over and over how to see the world in a new culture for them. I venture that they have been changed in ways that they don't even realize yet. Now their leader is saying he will die soon. He will no longer be with them. He is shaking up what they know once again. In all of the uncertainty about the future, they cling to what was familiar before Jesus. They are trying to fit Jesus into what they knew about the power structures of the day instead of getting curious about what he's saying and how the future could be different. Life is upside down for them, and they cling to returning to the way they knew the world to be before it changed beyond what they wanted. There is no going back after this storm. James and John do respond in a misguided way. It's recorded for 2,000 years. They are admonished, and they keep walking with Jesus. We are 20 months into a dual pandemic of a virus and racism. We've seen politics that are challenging, heartbreaking, and it's been hard. We're negotiating new ways of being together. Social norms and expectations are no longer a given. Some of us are hearing about unspoken parts of our culture that we never saw before, and it is heartbreaking. And even some of our little tasks, the ones we find comfort in, like gathering with family or even buying groceries, can feel challenging and tricky. It's easy to dream about the temptation of returning to normal when it feels like we're so close to the pandemic being over. We are changed. We are changed. We are changed in ways that we can notice if we stop and reflect. And we are changed in ways that are still being revealed. And through all of that change, we remain followers of Jesus. Our lives are shaped by the sacred stories of God, sacred stories which are hard and human, empathetic and hopeful, and above all, sacred stories which are about resurrection and God's love. Not sacred stories about life returning to the way it was, but instead a world that's full of God's love and God's kingdom here and now. A world that is upside down and better than we can imagine. To help myself stay grounded right now in our sacred stories and our time, I continue to remember that meeting room in Harbin. And I invite you to join me in my cross-cultural practices as tools of discernment as to where is God calling us as individuals and a community. First, may we be gentle with ourselves and firm. May we give up the idea of returning to the way it was and imagine with God the way it could be. May we give up the idea of a universal normal and instead dwell with wonder and curiosity. Wonder at what are we falling back on because it's the way it always was. How have we changed? What do we need to let go of? What are we called to embrace? Where are we finding comfort? When we do this together, we can better see the holy moving through our lives in this faith community and our neighborhoods. We can more clearly notice where God is guiding us. There is one more story in the Gospel of Mark before Jesus reaches Jerusalem. It's a story of faith, healing, and hope. We will read it next week, so I won't do a full sermon on it right now. But I will say that in Bartimaeus, a person who could not see, who had deep faith in Jesus and found new sight because of that faith, I find hope. We are sometimes like James and John. We are sometimes like Bartimaeus. We are always beloved children of God, and that is the good news. We are always invited to journey with Jesus. This won't change. Walking the road with Jesus is hard, it's exciting, it's life-changing. We know the ending, and it is very good.